Hoş geldiniz. Welcome. Hun bihir hatin. Ahlam ve sahlam. Vitame. Dobrodošli. Bienvenidos. Bienvenue. Herzlich willkommen. Welcome again. Thank you for your patience. As we sorted through this difficulty, we expected high participation, and sitting down on some of the remarks that I had prepared. I'm going to let Fatma Aytaç, who has been instrumental, key to the organization of this meeting, as the chairwoman of Kırmızı Biber Derneği, Red Pepper Association. She's a feminist activist and founder and co-chair of the Women's Party and founder and chairwoman of Red Pepper Association, which is part of Eşik Women's Platform for Equality. She's an alumna of Boğaziçi University. As you may realize, it's been also in the news lately. She has a lot of experience in the private sector, from which she's retired as an IT professional, CIO, but we are happy that she retired from that and devotes her full time and energy to the women's movement at a time when we need all the energy that we can get. Without further ado, I want her to briefly welcome and then I will take it from there.
Thank you, Özlem. Thank you so much. Sorry, everyone, for the problem we have. Thank you for each and every one of you for being with us here together today. We are so proud to host this critical meeting. We had planned this meeting to raise awareness about the attacks on the Istanbul Convention and our ongoing struggle to uphold women's rights. The Istanbul Convention, with full name, is the Council of Europe on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, is based on CEDAW, the Convention on Eliminating all forms of discriminations against women, and other human rights treaties of United Nations, to which Turkey is a party. The Istanbul Convention is designed to protect women and girls against all kinds of violence and provides comprehensive framework for states to take the necessary legal, administrative, and policy measures. This is the most exciting meeting of the month for me by far. Now it became more excited really after this technical problem. As you know, Turkey suddenly announced on their official gazette on March 20, late into the night, that they terminated the Istanbul Convention with a presidential decision. This is sad and disappointing decision, not only for the women, it is for women's group and women's rights defenders of the world as well. And this recent development make our meeting today very significant and critical. We have witnessed great solidarity from almost all UN bodies, Council of Europe, and women's organizations abroad. Thank you, everyone and every institution, for being in solidarity with us. We do not think that this decision to withdraw from Istanbul Convention is lawful, and we will continue our struggle for women's rights and violence against women, which has recently been called as shadow pandemic. We are here today in NGO Forum of Commission on Status of Women, shortly CSW. We come together every year in March for 2 weeks to discuss sustainable development goals and assess the improvements made in the past year and encourage all the countries to meet their developmental goals, such as to provide better life to women and girls, future generations, and eradicate violence against women, and to enable gender equality and generational equality. This year it's in Turkish. In Commission on Status of Women, and our NGO has consultative status in ECOSOC. On behalf of Red Pepper, I want to welcome to our distinguished panelists, Hulya Gulbahar, Genoveva Tisheva, Zuzanna Krzatala, did I said it correctly?
Yes, absolutely.
And Rosalyn Park, and all of our attendees from all over the world. Thanks again to all of you for your solidarity with our cause in Turkey. And I want to thank to Etkinliği Turkey EU program sponsoring for translation support. Now, as I mentioned, today's session will be focused on the Istanbul Convention. So to start the program, I will turn to our moderator, Özlem Altıok. Özlem teaches Women's and Gender Studies and International Studies at University of North Texas. In addition to being a teacher and scholar, Özlem is an environmentalist, peace and women's rights activist, and a part of Equality Watch Women's Group and Women's Platform Equality Turkey, shortly Eşik. Özlem, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, everyone. As you know, we gather to share our assessment of some very bad news, not just only for women's rights, but also for human rights and democracy. On March 17th, Turkey withdrew or announced with a decision of the president, not a decree, not law, but a decision of the president that Turkey was withdrawing from the Istanbul Convention. This comes at a time where we see so many examples of violence against women everywhere, from where I am sitting right now, from the United States, with the racist, misogynist murder of women, to Turkey, where just today we heard the news of 6 more femicides. So the gravity of the situation, of course, demands a commitment to prevent and combat violence against women. And yet, what we are gathered to discuss today is Turkey's decision to leave the convention altogether. We have also just received news that Turkey has communicated to the Council of Europe its decision. And so, needless to say, this has implications, not just for women, not just for human rights, not just for democracy in Turkey, but beyond. And I think it is good that we organized this panel months in advance, that we are here today having this opportunity to evaluate what has happened and to discuss how we may stand in solidarity with one another in these times. So without further ado, I want to start with a message from the Civil Society Director of UN Women, Ms. Lopa Banerjee. She has sent a video, and we thank Selma Juner for facilitating Banerjee's video message. So if I can share my screen with you, I will bring Lopa Banerjee's video to the front.
UN Women stands in solidarity with the women's movement in Turkey, which is urging the government of Turkey to reconsider its withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention on Ending Violence Against Women. Many partners, including the United Nations, have joined the women and girls of Turkey to reiterate the importance of upholding the full implementation of the Istanbul Convention at this time of increased violence against women and girls during the COVID-19 pandemic. The full weight of international norms, together with national laws and policies, must be used to end the shadow pandemic of gender-based violence. Only if women are safe from all forms of violence can we build back equal and transformed from COVID. The ratification and implementation of the Istanbul Convention by states is a crucial commitment in this direction. We urge Turkey to reconsider its withdrawal.
Of course, Lopa Banerjee had sent us this message before we had received news that Turkey had communicated the decision of the president and his decision to withdraw to the Council of Europe. To offer a perspective on the implications of this decision, I would like to invite Dr. Feride Acar next. She has such a long bio and so many accomplishments that I hope I can see her waving at me, skip all of that, and I will. I think most people who work in this field know her name very well. But briefly, she was a former chairperson of the UN CEDAW committee from 2003 to 2005. And for our purposes, directly important here is that she was involved in the drafting of the Council of Europe Convention on Prevention and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, which is what we're talking about, the Istanbul Convention. She was later elected the founding president of its monitoring organ, GREVIO. So I would like to ask Dr. Acar, please, to tell us what she thinks, what she feels, in a few words before we move to our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I cannot see myself, so I hope it's okay. Can you hear me and can you see me?
Hocam, we hear you very well and we see you very well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I was not going to participate. I'm in this meeting, not because I did not want to, but for personal reasons and for other kinds of engagements. But this very sudden development, and I hate to call it a development, but event has led to my to cause for me to make a short appearance here, and I do thank the organizers for giving me this chance. Now, in October last year, I spoke at a similar meeting organized by Turkish NGOs on an international meeting, and at that time we did have in Turkey concerns about the possibility of not so good developments in the way of the Istanbul Convention. And however, at that time, and in fact from early summer on, we considered and evaluated the possibilities of this country somehow limiting its commitment to the principles of the Istanbul Convention. Well, it has gone much beyond that, and as Özlem has said, all of a sudden we are now faced with the most drastic alternative of the total withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention. As I said then in that meeting, the misogynist and the ultra-conservative groups that find receptive ears, I would say, in the higher echelons of the government have been, I think, successful, and we have a new struggle as women to embark upon from this day on. It is really beyond words. I am searching for words to express my disappointment and my trauma, to be honest, at the position that we find ourselves in. And as Özlem mentioned, being involved in the drafting, in the also the monitoring of this convention, I have seen it grow up. And now to see all of a sudden that just when the convention is getting stronger and much more, much better understood by countries, by leaders, by people around the world, my own country that has given the name to this convention, as the name of its most prominent city, Istanbul, will no longer be a part of the convention. This is really, I mean, unthinkable, and we will have to find ways to deal with this. Let me just conclude by saying that Istanbul Convention is more than protection of women from violence against them. It is primarily about that, but it is more than that. It is a human rights convention, and it is a convention that protects people from discrimination and from violence against them. And I fear that to withdraw from this convention will withdrawal means that there is a withdrawal from the commitment to gender equality, because this is what the Istanbul Convention is based on. And there is a withdrawal from the commitment to human rights. And furthermore, it is really very disturbing to see that this kind of exit from such critical commitments of our day can be done so blatantly and so, my personal opinion, of course, unconstitutionally and illegally. So thank you very much for giving me the floor, and I look forward to listening to the other speakers.
Thank you very much, Feride Hoca. I know, and I want to thank all of our panelists from Eastern Europe and the United States for their messages of solidarity over the weekend. And as you can imagine, we had to shuffle the format of what we had in mind a little bit, and they were very graceful, in fact, eager to hear from the experience of women's rights activists in Turkey. And we are very honored and privileged, I think, today to hear from Hulya Gulbahar, who everyone would agree, I believe, is a towering figure in the women's rights movement, and she's worked tirelessly for decades, and I'm fairly sure that she is on at most 3 hours of sleep right now. Hulya Gulbahar is a feminist lawyer and activist who has been active in the women's movement in Turkey since the 1980s and has contributed to the making of many laws that ensure gender equality or aim to ensure gender equality in Turkey. She's among the founders and supporters of many independent associations and collectives such as Purple Roof Women's Shelter Foundation and Women's Library and Information Center Foundation. She's an active participant in and spokeswoman for the organized resistance to the ban on abortions, efforts to restrict alimony rights, proposals to grant amnesty to child sexual abusers, and most recently, the ruling party's statements to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention, and now the presidential decision to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention. Between the years 2007 and 2010, Gulbahar served as the chairwoman of the Foundation for Supporting Women Candidates, KADER, which promotes women's political representation. She continues to work for women's rights as a member of EŞİTİZ, Equality Watch Women's Group, and Eşik, Women's Platform for Equality in Turkey, which comprises over 340 women's and LGBTI plus organizations, as well as over 160 bar associations, professional associations, labor unions. I have known Hulya since 2008. So I can only aspire to be, to have half her energy. And without further ado, I want to ask Hulya to discuss the recent developments, and she will deliver her talk in Turkish, and you'll be able to listen from the English channel. Thank you, Hulya.
Şimdi bu paneli organize etmek konuşulduğu zaman Türkiye'de İstanbul Sözleşmesi'nden çıkış tartışmaları vardı. Şu anda ne yazık ki rastlantı olarak Türkiye'nin İstanbul Sözleşmesi'nden çıkmak konusunda dev bir adım attığı bir süreçte geldi. Tabii hepimiz Türkiye açısından, Türkiye'de kadın hareketi açısından üzgünüz ama aynı zamanda bu dünya kadın hareketi açısından da İstanbul Sözleşmesi gibi kadınların temel haklarından, ayrımcılığa uğramama, erkeklerle eşit yurttaşlık hakkının resmi olarak tanınması ve şiddetsiz bir hayat sürebilme haklarına yönelik dünya çapındaki genel saldırının bir parçası ve o saldırıyı büyütecek ve başka ülkelere de yayacak bir risk taşıdığı için hepimiz açısından son derece üzüntü verici bir sürece girmiş olduk. Türkiye'deki İstanbul Sözleşmesi'nden çıkış süreciyle ilgili çok kısaca şunu paylaşabilirim. Türkiye'de İstanbul Sözleşmesi normal olarak Bakanlar Kurulu kararı, Cumhurbaşkanlığı onayı ve Türkiye Büyük Millet Meclisi'nin parlamentonun kabul kanunuyla kabul edilmiş olan bir sözleşme. Yani bu 3 ayak tamamlanmadan bu sözleşmenin Türkiye açısından bir anlam ifade etmesi mümkün değil. Ve Türkiye bu süreci geçirdi. Özellikle Büyük Millet Meclisi'nde çok çeşitli siyasi partilerin olduğu bir Büyük Millet Meclisi'nde, parlamentoda bir çekimser oy katılanların tümünün oy birliğiyle kabul edildi. Yani bu herhangi bir dünya parlamentosunda gerçekleşmiş midir çok merak ediyorum. Kadın haklarına ilişkin bir sözleşmenin parlamentonun oy birliğiyle kabul edilmesi. Bunu Türkiye'deki siyasi görüşü ne olursa olsun kadın hareketinin örgütlü birleşik mücadelesi sayesinde başardık. Bu kendiliğinden olan bir şey değildi. Onun için bu sözleşme Türkiye'nin ilk imzacısı olduğu bir sözleşme olarak sözleşme yürürlüğe girdiği tarihte Türkiye'de de çekincesiz olarak yürürlüğe girdi. Ancak yürürlüğe girdiği andan itibaren bugüne kadar çok Türkiye açısından gerçekten marjinal bir grup kesimin ağır saldırısı altında hayatta kalmaya çalıştı ve uygulanması için her türlü engel ile karşılaştı İstanbul Sözleşmesi Türkiye açısından. Ve nihayet Cuma gece yarısı, yani cumartesi sabahı gece yarısı resmi gazetede yayınlanan bir Cumhurbaşkanlığı kararıyla sözleşmeden çıkıldığı iddia edildi. Bu noktayı biraz açmak istiyorum. Türkiye hukukunda yok hükmünde bir karar. Böyle bir kararla bir uluslararası sözleşmeden çıkılamaz. Çünkü bunu mutlaka meclisin onaylaması gerekiyor. Usulde paralellik diye bir şey var hukukta. Bir sözleşmeyi kanunla onayladıysanız kanunla çıkmanız gerekiyor sözleşmeden. Uluslararası hukuk da böyledir. Bizim iç hukukumuz da böyle. Şu anda İstanbul Sözleşmesi'nin kabul kanunu yürürlükte olduğu için İstanbul Sözleşmesi'nden çıkmaya ilişkin bir kişinin, Cumhurbaşkanı'nın verdiği karar tek başına hüküm doğurmaz. Tek başına hüküm doğurmak açısından yok hükmündedir. Bu nokta bizler açısından kritik önem taşıyor. Ve tabii ki sadece Türkiye açısından değil, İstanbul Sözleşmesi'nin hedef tahtasına oturtulduğu bütün ülkeler açısından büyük önem taşıyor. Özellikle antidemokratikleştikçe iktidarlar, otoriterleştikçe iktidarlar, ataerkil baskılar o ülkelerde artıyor. Simgesidir. Ataerkil, yani otoriterliğin simgesi kadınlar üzerinden, kadınların eşit yurttaşlık hakkı üzerinden bir sistem kurmaktır. Hiyerarşik bir toplum modeli yaratmaktır. Buna yani bunu gerçekleştirmeye çalışıyorlar Türkiye'de. Şimdi şu anda verilen karar bu nedenle hukuka aykırı bir karar. Türkiye Cumhuriyeti'nin anayasası son derece açık. Anayasayı ihlal eden ve anayasanın birçok maddesini ihlal eden bir kararla karşı karşıyayız burada. 10. maddesini ihlal ediyor. Kadın erkek eşitliğini sağlayan maddeyi. 17. madde, bütün yurttaşların can güvenliğini sağlamak zorunda devlet. 17. maddeyi ihlal ediyor. 48. madde, sadece kanun koymak yetkisi sadece meclise aittir. Halkın egemenliği mecliste tecelli eder. Meclisin kanunu olmadığı sürece uluslararası bir sözleşmeye de giremezsiniz. Temel haklarla ilgili sözleşmeye. Oradan da çıkamazsınız. 48. maddeyi ihlal ediyor. Anayasanın 90. maddesi Türkiye'de çok önemli bir madde. Uluslararası sözleşmeler temel haklara ilişkin bir sözleşme ise o sözleşmedeki maddeler Türkiye'nin iç hukukundaki kanun maddeleriyle çeliştiği takdirde yerli kanun gider, onun yerine uluslararası sözleşmenin hükmü gelir. Bakın, uluslararası sözleşme hükümlerine Türkiye hukuku açısından anayasaya aykırılık itirazında bile bulunamazsınız. Anayasaya aykırı olsa bile o sözleşme hükümleri geçerlidir. Ve şu anda Türkiye'de yaşadığımız hukuksal saçmalık diyeceğim buna, özür dilerim. Saçmalık, bütün bu anayasa hükümlerini, bütün bu yasa hükümlerini bir tarafa bırakıp bir kişinin kararıyla bu sözleşmenin ortadan kaldırılmaya çalışılması. Ne yazık ki bugün Avrupa Konseyi'nin bu kararı, bu hukuken yok hükmünde sayılması gereken kararı işleme koyduğunu ve İstanbul Sözleşmesi'nin 80. maddesi gereği Türkiye'nin 3 ay sonra İstanbul Sözleşmesi'nden çıkacağını ilan ettiğini gördük web sayfasına girdiğimizde. Bu korkunç yanlış bir karar. Yani ben bambaşka şeyler konuşuruz bugün diye düşünüyordum. Ama maalesef bütün Avrupa ve dünya insan hakları sistemi açısından sözleşmeyle ilgili bu hukuk dışı sözleşmeden çıkma girişiminin Avrupa Konseyi tarafından ciddiye alınıp yürürlüğe konmasını tartışmak zorunda kalıyoruz burada. Bilmiyorum, bu teknik bir sorun gibi görünebilir ama bunun arkasından Polonya'da, Bulgaristan'da ve Avrupa'nın başka ülkelerinde ve biz bu İstanbul Sözleşmesi'ni dünya sözleşmesi yapmak için uğraşıyoruz. Feride Hocam da burada. Kazakistan'dan Tunus'a dünyanın birçok ülkesi bu sözleşmeye dahil olmak için çalışırken sözleşmeden bu şekilde hukuk dışı yöntemlerle çıkış yolunun açılması bütün dünya kadın hareketi için inanılmaz bir yanlış emsal karar olacak. Onun için bu meseleyi bilmiyorum, tartışma bölümünde biraz zamanımız kalır ve açar mıyız diye, ama şimdilik bu konuyla bağlı başka bir konuya geçmeden önce bir şey daha söylemek istiyorum. Uluslararası hukuka da aykırı bir işlemle karşı karşıyayız. Avrupa Konseyi bu Cumhurbaşkanlığı kararlılığını iç hukukta uygun bir yasa olmadığı sürece yürürlüğe koyamaz. Sadece bu da yeterli değil. Aynı zamanda temel haklarla ilgili olduğu için hiçbir devlet insanların can güvenliğiyle ilgili, vücut bütünlüğüyle ilgili, şiddetsiz bir hayat hakkıyla ilgili, en temel haklarıyla ilgili sözleşmeleri böyle pat diye feshedemez. O ülkeyi o sistemden, insan hakları uluslararası sisteminden kopartamaz. Buna Viyana Anlaşmalar Hukuku Sözleşmesi dediğimiz çok önemli bir sözleşme, aynı zamanda engel. Sözleşmenin, bakın, iç hukukla ilgili anlattım. Kanunla kabul ediyorsan kanunla çıkmalısın. Aynı şey uluslararası hukuk için de geçerli. Viyana Sözleşmesi'nin 46. maddesi usulde paralellik der. Bir devletin bir sözleşmeye üye olduktan sonra ben burada hata yaptım, dönüyorum bu sözleşmeden deme hakkı olmadığını anlatır. Evleviyetle bu 46. maddenin uygulanması gerekiyor. Aynı şekilde bütün devletlerin, Türkiye Cumhuriyeti Devleti'nin şu anda yaptığı çıkma girişiminde olduğu gibi hukuk dışı bu kararlara tek tek devlet olarak da müdahale etme hakkı var. O yüzden biz Eşitlik için Kadın Platformu olarak bugün ilgili tüm kesimlere bir mektup gönderdik ve Avrupa Konseyi'nin bu kararını geri almasını, 3 aylık süreyi başlatmamasını istedik. Bu konuda bütün Dünya Kadın Hareketi'nin de desteğini bekliyoruz. Kısa bir metin hazırlayıp konseye bunu çok net bir şekilde anlatmamız lazım. Çünkü aksi takdirde biz Türkiye'de muhalefeti ve iktidarı kanunsuz bir şekilde çıkamazsınız'a ikna etmeye çalışırken ne yazık ki konseyin derhal işleme sokması, hukuki bir işlemmiş gibi bunu bizde inanılmaz bir hayal kırıklığı yarattı. Yani Türkiye Kadın Hareketi olarak, Dünya Kadın Hareketi olarak gerçekten bu uluslararası kurumları tekrar tartışmamızın, bu kurumları daha demokrat, daha özgürlükçü, temel insan haklarına daha saygılı kurumlar olarak davet etmemizin tam zamanı ve bu anlamda uluslararası bir birlik oluşturmanın da tam zamanı diye düşünüyoruz. Aksi takdirde bu kurumlar, örneğin ülkesel göç politikaları nedeniyle, örneğin bir takım finans anlaşmaları nedeniyle, örneğin bir tür silahlanma ittifakları nedeniyle kadınların, çocukların ve bütün insanların temel haklarını bu şekilde kendi aralarında pazarlık konusu yapamazlar. Türkiye'de İstanbul Sözleşmesi, yani %0.1 oyu olan siyasi partilerle iktidar partisi arasında ittifak görüşmelerinde pazarlık konusu yapıldı. Bu dünya için de fark etmiyor. Bu kurumları biraz daha hareketli hale getirmek lazım. Şimdi bir noktanın daha altını çizmek istiyorum ben. Bu işlem yapılırken sözleşmenin Türkiye'de kadınları şiddetten korumak için gereksiz olduğu, Türkiye'nin zaten iç hukukunun kadınları şiddetten korumaya yeterli olduğu gibi bir argüman kullanılıyor. Bir PowerPoint hazırlamıştım ben sizler için. Yani ona da çok kısaca değinmek istiyorum. Açabilirsek bakalım Türkiye'deki duruma. Gerçekten Türkiye'de kadınları şiddetsiz bir hayat yaşamalarını sağlayacak kadınların ya da cinayetlerden kadınları koruyacak bir mekanizma var mı Türkiye'de? Görmek için açabilirsek PowerPoint'i. Ben açamıyorum sanıyorum. Şimdi şeyden geldiğimiz için. Evet. Bir sonraki slayta geçersek orada Türkiye'nin güvenilir son kadın cinayeti verisini görüyoruz biz bu tabloda. 2002 yılında Adalet ve Kalkınma Partisi Türkiye'de iktidara geldiğinde bir yıldaki kadın cinayeti sayısı 66 idi. 2009 yılının son sütunda ilk 7 ayında, sadece 7 ayında 953 kadın öldürüldü. Yani bir yıllık değil, 7 aylık rakamdır bu 953. %1400'lük artış yaşandı. 7 yılda Türkiye'de, 6,5 yılda %1400'lük artış. Ve bu rakamlar mecliste açıklandı. Adalet Bakanı'nın açıkladığı rakamlar bunlar. Ve bu rakamlara şüpheli ölümler, intihar süsü verilenler, kaza süsü verilenler, zehirlenme süsü verilenler bu rakamlara dahil değil. Bu tarihten itibaren Türkiye'de bir ciddi rakam bulmak mümkün değil. Bir sonraki slayta geçersek rakamlarla nasıl oynandığını bize net bir şekilde gösteriyor bu. Bakın birinci sütunda 953 kadın, ki ilk 7 ay bu, 2009 yılının 953 kadın cinayeti, kayıtlara cinayet olarak geçenler, şak diye 2009 yılında 171 diye açıklandı bir diğer bakanlıktan. Rakamlarla böyle oynandı ve o tarihten beri bu rakamlar 3 aşağı 5 yukarı böyle gidiyor. Sonuncu sütun bağımsız bir medya kuruluşunun basından derleyebildiği rakamlardan oluşuyor. O da bakanlığın açıkladığı rakamlardan fazla. Yani ölen kadınları dirilten bir karartma uygulanıyor Türkiye'de 2009'dan beri. Onun için biz Eşik olarak Türkiye'de her gün en az 3 kadın öldürülüyor. Bu artık bir cins kırım boyutuna ulaştı. Bu kadın cinayetlerini durdurmak için İstanbul Sözleşmesi'ni uygulayın kampanyası yapıyorduk. Bakın bir sonraki slide, kampanya yapıldıktan sonra, kampanyaya başladığımız gün Türkiye'de 4 kadın öldürülmüştü basına yansıyan. Bu 12 Şubat günü kampanya sırasında 4 kadın, 3 ölüm var. Bir tanesinin ağır yaralı, akıbetini bilmiyoruz. Dün 5 kadın öldürüldü Türkiye'de. Bunlar sadece basına yansıyanlar, şüpheli olmayan ölümler. Dün 5 kadın öldürüldü. Son 12 saatte 6 kadın öldürüldü. Şimdi buna bakarsak gün de değil artık. Türkiye'deki kadın cinayetlerinin ulaştığı boyut 2 saatte bir kadın öldürülüyor boyutuna gelmiş durumdayız. Şimdi bu tabloya rağmen bir sonraki slayta geçersek göreceğiz ki Türkiye'de kadınların herhangi bir şiddete karşı koruma mekanizmasının yararlanma oranı 2008 yılında %8'di. 2014'te %11'e çıkabildi ancak bu. %89'u hiçbir yere başvuramıyor bu kadınların ve bu mekanizmalardan yararlanamıyor. Hacettepe Üniversitesi'nin araştırması bu. Bir sonraki slayta geçelim. Çok yormayacağım sizi rakamlarla. Bir sonraki slayt Türkiye'deki mekanizma, şiddetle mücadele mekanizmasının durumunu anlatıyor. 2018 rakamı ama bu sığınakların sayısı artmadı, azaldı. Covid döneminde bazı sığınakları tamir ediyoruz diyerek kapattılar. Toplam sığınak kapasitesi Türkiye'de sayısı 144, kapasite 3454 kapasite. Tabii ki çok yetersiz. 32 tane belediye sığınağı var görünüyor burada. Her nüfusu 100 bini geçen her belediyenin sığınak açması lazım. Ve Türkiye'de şu anda bakanlık, yani İstanbul Sözleşmesi'nin öngördüğü şekilde çalışan bir alo şiddet hattı yok. Sadece İçişleri Bakanlığı'nın cep akıllı telefonlarda çalışan KADES diye bir uygulaması var. Bütün kadınlar buna ulaşamıyor. Yani kurumsal mekanizma böyle. Cinsel şiddet kriz merkezi Türkiye'de bir adet yok. Merkez açacağım diyen bir belediye ya da merkez iktidar da yok. Şiddet hattı yok. Sığınak yetersiz, cinsel şiddet kriz merkezi yok. Dolayısıyla Türkiye'de kadına karşı şiddete ilişkin kurumsal mekanizma işlemiyor diyebiliriz. Bir sonraki son slaytımız sanıyorum bu konuyla ilgili. Bu slayt çok önemli. Aile Bakanlığı'nın GREVIO'ya Türkiye ile ilgili verdiği rapordan aldığımız bir slide bu. 2016 yılına bakarsanız en sonunda 55.757 kadın şiddetle ilgili koruma kanunundan yararlanmış. 55.750. Bu kadınlar içinde 3. sıraya bakın 42.351 kadının hayati tehlikesi varmış. Hayati tehlike olduğu için bu 42.000 kadına geçici koruma vermişler devlet tarafından. Ama bakın gidelim geçici maddi yardım 2. sıraya sadece 10 kadına geçici maddi yardım verilmiş. İnelim aşağıya, orada hemen kreş yardımı sadece 6 kadına kreş yardımı verilmiş. Bakın 55.000'i geçtim. 42.000 hayati tehlikesi olan kadından bahsediyoruz. 6 kadına kreş yardımı, 10 kadına geçici maddi yardımdan bahsediyoruz. Bu da işte bize sanıyorum son slaytımız. Bize Türkiye'de bizim İstanbul Sözleşmesi'ne gerek yok. Kendi yasalarımız, kendi düzenlemelerimiz buna yetecek. Kararlılıkla kadınları şiddetten koruyoruz diyen söylemleri nasıl gerçekle bağdaşmadığını gösteriyor. Şimdi bu son slaytımız iletişim, devlet adına yapılan sözleşmeden çıkış açıklaması. Bu açıklamaya baktığımız zaman şunu söylüyorlar. Sözleşme başlangıçta kadın haklarının güçlendirilmesini teşvik ediyordu. Ama sonra toplumsal ve aile değerleriyle bağdaşmayan, eşcinselliği normalleştirilmeye çalışan bir kesim tarafından manipüle edildi. İşte biz de bu yüzden çekildik diyor. Dolayısıyla resmi açıklama sözleşmeden sadece bu nedenle çekildiğini söyleyen bir açıklama. Bunun da hiçbir şekilde gerçekle bağdaşır bir yanı yok. Türkiye'de LGBTİ hareket gerçekten yıllardır nefes alması yasaklanacak şekilde baskı altında. Ayakta kalmaya, hayat hakkını korumaya çalışıyor Türkiye'nin cinsel yönelim ve cinsiyet kimliği nedeniyle insanlar Türkiye'de. Değil ki bütün bir topluma yayılıp İstanbul Sözleşmesi'nin böyle uygulanmasını sağlayacaklar. İnsan haklarına, temel insan haklarına son derece aykırı bir gerekçeyle karşı karşıyayız. Şimdi Türkiye açısından tabii ki sözleşmeden çıkıldığında bir şey olmayacak ama Avrupa Konseyi'ne tekrar bir şey hatırlatmak gerekiyor. Bu hukuk dışı kararı yürürlüğe koymaması gerekiyor. 11 Eylül 2020 tarihinde Avrupa Konseyi'nin Parlamenterler Meclisi'nin Eşitlik ve Ayrımcılıkla Mücadele Komitesi PACE bir açıklama yapmıştı. Polonya'da ve Türkiye'de sözleşmeden çıkma girişimlerine karşı yapmıştı bu açıklamada. Bu 11 Eylül tarihli PACE açıklamasında son derece net bir şekilde şunu söylüyor. İstanbul Sözleşmesi risk altındaki kadınların ve çocukların güvenliğini sağlamak istiyor diyor. İstanbul Sözleşmesi toplumsal cinsiyet eşitliğini teşvik etmek istiyor diyor. İstanbul Sözleşmesi kadınlara karşı ayrımcılığın önlenmesini öngörüyor diyor. Bu üç kriter de aynı zamanda Avrupa İnsan Hakları Sözleşmesi'nin kriterleridir. Dolayısıyla sizin sözleşmeden çıkmanız Avrupa İnsan Hakları Sözleşmesi'nden çıkış olmadığı sürece sizi devlet olarak bu yükümlülükleri yerine getirmekten azade kılamaz diyor. Şimdi dolayısıyla Avrupa Konseyi'nin bu işlemi yürürlüğe koyarken aynı Viyana Sözleşmelerinde olduğu gibi temel haklara ilişkin bir sözleşmenin yani dolaylı olarak Avrupa İnsan Hakları Sözleşmesi'ni de tehdit eden bir girişimle karşı karşıyayız. Bu cevabı verip iç hukuk açısından geçerli olup olmadığını sorması lazımdı. Paylaşmak istediğim çok konu var. Çok heyecanlıyız, çok dertliyiz Türkiye Kadın Hareketi olarak ama benden sonraki konuşmacıların da süresine haksızlık etmek istemiyorum. Soru cevap bölümünde şeyin sonunda belki konuşmaların sonunda ne yapabiliriz hep beraber bunu tekrar değerlendirmek için küçük bir söz isteyebilirim. Çok teşekkürler.
Thank you so much, Hulya. I have to add here that Hulya Gulbahar is not only a women's rights activist, but at the same time, and in addition, I think she is a very important thinker and political analyst. So I think that her a few of her assessments here need highlighting. One is that the Council of Europe should really reconsider its strategy in dealing with what it does with Turkey's communication that it's withdrawing, because not only is this presidential decision contrary to the Turkish constitution, not only is it unlawful by domestic laws and legislation, but it also undermines the principle of human rights, as this treaty concerns a fundamental human right, the right to live. The Council of Europe has a big responsibility, and this is really a very crucial time that will determine the future of multilateralism, the future of human rights, the future of democracy. And it is not a time to use women's rights as a bargaining chip, whether it's for weapons treaties or immigration concerns. And I think that these need to be highlighted. I hope that we can get back to Hulya at the end and perhaps discuss, because many people are asking how they can help, how they can support. So I also will send in the chat what Women's Platform for Equality has written, the Council of Europe. We have a statement on this. So I want to turn to Genoveva Tisheva, who is a member of the UN CEDAW Committee for Bulgaria between 2019 and 2022. Genoveva is also the chair of the Working Group on Gender-Based Violence Against Women, the managing director of the Bulgarian Gender Research Foundation, and the chair of the Alliance for Protection from Gender-Based Violence. A lawyer, researcher, and advocate, Genoveva is an expert in the field of gender equality and women's rights and has extensive experience in legal reform, having participated in drafting the Bulgarian law for protection against domestic violence. She's a member of the European Network of Legal Experts in Gender Equality and Non-Discrimination, and until 2019, she served as the vice chair of the European Women's Lawyers Association. She has actually received the Special Human Rights Defenders Award of the Advocates for Human Rights from Minnesota in 2017. Genoveva, please tell us the situation, the nature of the attacks on the Istanbul Convention in Bulgaria, as well as what the implications maybe of this decision in Turkey may be there and elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Perfectly well.
Okay, I will try until you hear me. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks to the organizers, to you, to all the wonderful speakers before me. And thank you for this presentation. I will speak about the Turkish situation also from the point of view of me being expert and member of the CEDAW committee, and also briefly how it affects our realities in the region. I will say a few words about Bulgaria, and then of course it's interesting to hear from the colleagues from other countries and from the region. So the decision of the government of Turkey to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention is one of the saddest and most deplorable events during this pandemic and in the history of women's rights in Europe, I would say. Turkey that gave all Europe the example of ratifying first the convention, and Turkey which gave such eminent experts at global level as Mrs. Feride Acar, but also Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, and where our sisters developed one of the most vibrant women's movements we are now cooperating with. The process preceding this decision was indicative for the outcome, despite all protests and despite the alerting figures like data from 2019 that I got, 474 women were murdered, mostly by partners and relatives, the highest rate in a decade, in which the numbers have increased year on year. And from the beginning of 2021, over 70 murders, I think, of women were reported. And the implementation of the convention and of the national legislation has deteriorated in the last years as well, according to information from civil society. These sources have shared that they saw some progress in the past over the years through the monitoring process and the dialogue of the CEDAW committee with the government under the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the CEDAW Convention. So the committee recommended to the government to make serious changes in the field of gender equality and violence against women. The number of shelters was not sufficient and their number increased. But in the last years, women's NGOs and activists say that there is a lack of feminist approach, which was announced as a significant problem. And I will mention just some recommendations from the conclusion and recommendations of the CEDAW committee from 2016 that concern violence against women. in Turkey. It's important that the committee recommended that the state party strengthen its efforts to prosecute and punish adequately all crimes committed in the name of so-called honor, and ensure that suicides, accidents, and other violent deaths of women and girls are effectively investigated inter alia by using forensic evidence. And also to dismantle the concept that the honor and prestige of a man of the family are intrinsically associated with the conduct or presumed conduct of women related to them, which is based on patriarchal attitudes and
at this time, maybe take this minute to say we have over 300 people watching the webinar right now from all over the world. And despite the technical glitch that we experienced, this I think shows the intensity of the feeling and feelings of solidarity with the women's rights movement in Turkey, and also the deep level of concern that people have. Thank you all for that. Since we can't hear Genoveva right now, I am going to perhaps propose that we move to Zuzanna, if that's all right. Zuzanna, if you would please be the next speaker, I will introduce you. Zuzanna Krzatala is a Warsaw-based feminist and activist advocating for reproductive rights and the end of gender-based violence. She's a graduate of the New School for Social Research in New York and Zolberg Institute on Migration Mobility Fellow. She gained her experience in the third sector from the International Rescue Committee, where she was involved in drafting a feminist humanitarian policy, which addressed sex and gender-based violence in conflict. Through her fieldwork with refugees in Rwanda, Jordan, and Lesbos, she focused on initiatives that empowered women. Since her return to Poland, she has been involved with the Social Education Foundation promoting HIV testing and fundraising for the Women's Rights Center. Currently, she's a project coordinator of the Humanity in Action Poland Foundation, which educates and inspires young leaders and activists in the field of human rights. So I would like Zuzanna to come forward, please. And Poland is a very important case because, as Hulya was pointing out, it also officially stated its inclination to withdraw from the convention. And this news, of course, this is an obvious reason why the implications here extend beyond Turkey. So, Zuzanna, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this introduction. Özlem, can you all hear me? Yes, perfect. Let me actually begin by saying how much Humanity in Action Poland and generally the international network of HIA stands in solidarity and sympathizes with Turkish women and all of the sexual minorities that are affected by this decision. I'm actually personally worried that Turkey's decision to withdraw from the convention might embolden Poland to follow suit. Poland has signed the convention in 2012 and ratified in 2015. However, on more than several occasions now, it has threatened to withdraw, most recently in June 2020. Conservative forces, whether in government or outside, have been stepping up their efforts to reject the Istanbul Convention and to replace it with another treaty that seeks to boost what they consider to be the rights of the so-called traditional families. And just to kind of give you an idea of, what is the conversation that's taking place in Poland, what kind of language is used to attack and to undermine the convention, I just wanted to, bring up some of the comments that, are being discussed in like the wider public. Actually, these are the comments made by the female MPs from the governing party. So they say the convention mandates a blind fight against tradition, religion, and culture. Another one declares that gender equality is simply heresy. Of course, the church echoes the kind of sentiment saying that the convention is trying to create a new social order where the family and tradition will be marginalized by introducing gender ideology. So we see this over and over again, this, I would say, it's not even a misreading of the document. It's a very conscious propaganda to sway the public against the convention. But in fact, it shows, the recent survey, that as many as 60% Polish people stand for the convention, and only about 12% are actually against. But like I said, there is a concerted effort. And recently, very concrete steps have been taken to actually denounce the convention and to replace it with a document that's authored by the Ordo Juris Institute. It's the ultra-conservative think tank. It's titled, Yes to the Family, No to Gender. It is a citizens' initiative. And as such, it is actually currently being debated in the Polish Parliament, and it emphasizes the perception of the family as a union between a man and a woman, while decrying the Istanbul Convention as being ideological. It also takes issue with the wording and the causes of domestic violence and violence against women in general. So they say that the causes of violence are not related to structural gender inequality, but rather the so-called pathologies, among which are alcoholism, pornography, social atomization, the breakdown of family ties, divorce, sexualization of women in public space. So it sort of shifts the attention from the responsibility being placed on the gender roles and like the stereotypes, but focuses on, let's say, drug abuse or alcohol that also in some way or another might justify the violence that takes place. So it really prioritizes saving the family as a unit that will, in and of itself, prevent the violence. So just to kind of paint a picture of where Poland stands as it is during the COVID-19 pandemic, and as we were told, the shadow pandemic of domestic violence. So Poland really likes to praise itself on the fact that we have a very low number of, reported official instances of domestic violence. So in fact, last year, official police statistics had only reported 73,000 of incidents of domestic violence. Like I said, this is not a number for like a celebration, but actually a concern, because it proves how cases of domestic violence are very much underreported. Actually, non-profits, Center for Women's Rights, estimate that as many as 1 million of Polish women fall victim to domestic violence each year. It also shows that the system is not conducive to women feeling safe coming forward and reporting incidents of violence. And that, of course, results in fewer and fewer perpetrators being held accountable. It is actually estimated that as many as 3/4 of women experiencing violence do not receive any help because they do not ask for help. Again, it's not women's responsibility to ask for help. It is the state's responsibility to create conditions for women to come forward. And yet every week, I mean, I wouldn't say it's as dramatic as it is in Turkey, but every week we hear, you know, of another woman who was not believed, who was not listened to, who was not helped. And everything happens behind closed doors. Everything happens at home, in the family, in the so-called sacred family that the church and the ruling party, you know, revere so much. So in such context comes this initiative, Yes to the Family, No to Gender, that is being spearheaded by Ordo Iuris. And its chief goal is to immediately terminate the Istanbul Convention. So it doesn't even try to hide what are its true motives. And it wants to commence work on a draft of the International Convention on the Rights of the Family. So although it seems that it's unlikely that the initiative will gain enough public support to pass, it is enough to lay the grounds for a serious alternative to the Istanbul Convention. And this is somewhere where Poland steps up as it shows its true aspiration to become somewhat of a regional leader, to call all the other countries to form such an alternative convention. So only last week, March 15th, there was a leaked letter from the government coming from the Ministry of Justice that was sent to countries in the region. And it has revealed Poland's plans to replace the Istanbul Convention with an international treaty that seeks to ban abortion and same-sex marriage. Well, you might ask, it doesn't really change anything for Poland, because as you know, abortion has essentially just been banned in Poland, and we're very far from the conversation of allowing same-sex marriage. It also, you know, stresses that the term sex, gender, should not be understood as a set of biological features, including genetic features, enabling the objective distinction between man and a woman. So it really goes after LGBT communities. It goes after what I would call, you know, like a normalization of different gender expressions. It also introduces the concept of crimes against the family. So this is a really new concept, and it's open to wide-ranging interpretation. What can be constituted a crime against the family? Could it be abortion? Could it be divorce? Recently in Poland, we've seen a huge campaign in a public place with these posters placed all over the country, like everywhere. You know, and some of the posters, they really seem to mean no harm. They say, "Mommy and Daddy, please love each other." And you wonder, you know, what's the kind of message behind it? "Mommy and Daddy, please love each other." It's in fact, at the beginning, it's laying the ground for a conversation to start banning divorce in Poland. It shows that family is the unit that cannot be destroyed, that if you have strong family, strong traditional family, no violence can happen. So if we do talk about Poland withdrawing, well, you know, there's been a conversation in the past few days in Poland, and people try to calm the alarmists by saying that it is a lengthy and arduous process. But seeing what has just happened in Turkey, speaking from my own, personal opinion, I'm worried that we might be heading that direction, and if not, if anything, Poland is showing its willingness to step forward, to take charge, to really be in opposition to EU, to prevent advances for women and minority rights in the EU. They actually say themselves, we want to be pioneers in creating a strong voice in favor of yes to the natural family and no to gender. They really do not hide their agenda. So in some way or another, it might ease our actions, because there's no hidden agenda. It's all out there in the spotlight. And, we've been out on the streets in huge numbers since late October. People are tired. People are on the verge of exhaustion, despite the incredible mobilization of Polish women and their allies, because it wasn't just, women. There were really men on tractors. There were farmers on tractors, joining in small towns. Everyone standing up to the ban, to the now implemented but then proposed ban of the abortion. And yet it really served a blow, knowing that despite such mobilization, they were still able to go ahead and institute the very controversial constitutional tribunal ruling to ban abortion in Poland. Maybe I will leave it at that, and if you have any more questions, I'll be happy to address them.
Thank you so much, Zuzanna. I want to highlight a couple of things that Zuzanna said. There are indeed many similarities here in the cases. One thing to keep in mind and to remind ourselves, everybody here knows this, but gender-based violence and violence against women is real. Women are dying. And this is the most extreme form, murders of women. Femicides are the most extreme form of violence. So there are many other types, of course, and before it gets to that. So there's a real issue that needs to be prevented, combated, solved. This is what the Istanbul Convention does, and this is what they are attacking. So it is very important to make this clear. As they make it clear, they might be saying that, oh, we don't want violence against women. Well, if you don't want violence against women, then why are you withdrawing from a treaty whose sole purpose is to prevent that? Despite all these concerted efforts by religious, conservative, right-wing organizations and their funders, it's noteworthy, Zuzanna said, in Poland, only 12% are against the Istanbul Convention. In Turkey, this is even smaller, 7%. So there is actually a social consensus that the Istanbul Convention is good and that it should be implemented. Another thing I want to underline in what Zuzanna said, because this is, we fear, is in the works, and it's a very solid, concrete plan. An alternative to the Istanbul Convention. And I'm afraid that this is already in the works. It looks like what we are seeing is a concerted effort and plan that's been set in motion already. I want to go back to Genoveva if she's able to unmute and finish her presentation.
I unmuted now. It's okay?
Yes, great. We can hear you, Genoveva, and I think she's unable to turn on her video, so our attendees may not be seeing Genoveva's video, but she's here and the floor is yours.
Okay, I will try. If I see there is interruption, I will go back and try to continue. I think did I speak about the monitoring by the CSW committee, or it was already stopped and muted? Did you hear that about the monitoring of the CSW committee or not?
No.
No, okay. So I will quickly do that. Okay. I wanted to say after my introduction, and then I quickly will comment on Zuzanna's points, because it's in the end, that prior to that, according to sources and NGOs, some progress was there. I mean, and over the years, especially through the monitoring process and the dialogue with the CSW committee under the convention, under the CSW convention, there were improvements, and it was seen that even if there were not enough shelters, still there was increase in the number of shelters. But in the last years, women's NGOs reported that there is lack of feminist approach, and which is actually announcing non-implementation and a significant problem, which brought also to this result. I will mention just some recommendations of the CSW committee. So can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, okay. Very briefly then, from 2016 for Turkey, so that the state party strengthen its efforts to prosecute and punish adequately all crimes committed in the name of so-called honor, and ensure that suicides, accidents, and other violent deaths of women and girls are effectively investigated. And very important, dismantle the concept that the honor and prestige of a man, of the family, are intrinsically associated with the conduct or presumed conduct of women related to them, which is based on patriarchal attitudes and serves to control women and curb their personal autonomy, and it is absolutely incompatible with the convention. And also concerning women affected by the resurgence of violence between the Turkish security forces and the Kurdish Workers' Party, the committee recommended that serious violations were happening against those women, during this actually struggles. So they should, Turkey should take measures to protect women who are victims of human rights violations committed in the context of armed conflict and counter-terrorism measures. So it's also what is perpetrated and actually perpetrated by the state. And I would like to mention that in the state report, 8th periodic report submitted by the government of Turkey in November 2020, the government speaks about the range of measures taken against gender-based violence against women, and mentions the implementation also of the recommendations of the GREVIO committee and future commitment. It shows future commitment to implement these recommendations as well. So can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, Genoveva, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. The current move of the Turkish government with this decision to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention is a severe act of regression from the commitments made under international human rights law. It negates human rights of women, gender equality, and the progress made on violence against women in the country, which also includes the great contribution of women's NGOs. It is regression from acquired rights of women and violation of the obligation for progressive realization of their social economic rights and the obligation for non-regression. It also represents stepping out from the recognition of the Jus Cogens norms, the peremptory norms of international law, as the protection from torture, femicide, as you said, and such as the right to equality and non-discrimination are such norms of law. We strongly believe that with the reaction of the international community at regional UN level of the women's movement, the Turkish government can still review and reverse its decision and show a more normal face to the world and to its people. It is to deplore that in the case of notification for denunciation of the Istanbul Convention, under the Convention, it is provided that only 3 months are needed for the denunciation to come into effect, compared, for example, to 1-year period needed for the denunciation coming into effect under the Belém do Pará Convention. This is a question of fundamental rights, as we said. It cannot be decided and out of effect so quickly. Therefore, full mobilization is needed in the shortest delays by civil society organizations, internationally, all institutions, and also the support of all the countries, all the governments that the Turkish government is in relations with, that the government's partners of the Turkish government. Their disapproval and insistence, it has to be sought very strongly and actively. As to the reflections in Bulgaria, it was announced, but not so commented, but it's important that for the pre-election period, we will have national elections now on 4th of April. Nationalistic parties, but also conservative forces, which also include the leftist party, the left parties as the Socialist Party in Bulgaria, they all boost and say that, yelling that they stopped this evil, the Istanbul Convention. Can you believe that this in the pre-election period they used this tool, which is a very bad sign, and now it comes also this withdrawal from Turkey. So the progressive people and civil society organizations from our region and Europe, we have to respond even more united to these attacks and impede the toxic retrograde ideology, which was spread also in Europe, and its corrupt exponents who are in governments, to continue distorting and nullifying adopted and acquired progressive international human rights standards. And can you hear me? Yes. And I would like to say in response to Zuzanna that exactly, because what you said, Özlem, is that the convention, people are not against the convention, and also that focusing on the family is just a populist trick, which is so nasty, because people are not against the convention. But the important thing is that this ideology I mentioned, and we know retrograde and toxic one, is in power. There are not so many people that they are in power, and this is the problem. And the other thing, for example, if in Poland they say that they cherish family and family relations, compare the Eurostat data from 2020, that in a country like Bulgaria, where we are immediately after France, 60% of the children are born out of the wedlock. It means that we have a variety of relations, like in many other countries, but things are not happening in this concept of family. They have this ideology, this conservative. But anyway, because they are in power, they are all working together. This is the same messages compared to Poland. Poland, for example, ranks last, just the opposite trend. Most of the children are born, out in marriage. But you imagine it's the same ideology and does not take into account what the situation in the country. France, Bulgaria is like France, and then last rank Poland, with more conservative, let's say, with more children born mostly in the family, in the marriage. These are Poland, Lithuania, Greece, and Croatia. But compare then when we are Bulgaria, and also decisions like in Turkey. So you see, it is a question of ideology. It's not a question of reality, not a question of acceptability in society of what the government is doing. So we have to act. It is just a situation they want. It's a fake situation. It's not a situation corresponding to realities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Genoveva. And I'm going to be very quick in highlighting a couple of things that you said, just with Poland and Turkey and Bulgaria too. This is another reason why the withdrawal from this convention, or talk of withdrawal, that is probably going to gain some momentum after Turkey's unfortunate presidential decision, is a matter for democracy, because it is clear that this is not an issue that is on people's, the population's agenda. It's not the people that are against it. It's, in fact, all of civil society. Here we are at the 65th session of the UN Committee on the Status of Women meetings. We gather here as hundreds and hundreds of organizations, and we hear no objection, just as we hear very little objection in these countries to the convention. So what this means in effect is that it's not people's voice and it's not people's priorities that these governments are advocating. This is very clear. So the international community, Genoveva is very right, and Hulya was actually emphasizing this too, has a big responsibility to take the necessary steps and not legitimize such retrograde, toxic retrograde ideas, as Genoveva said, in the sphere of Council of Europe or the United Nations. I think it is very telling that the current Speaker of the General Assembly at the United Nations, Mr. Volkan Bozkır, opened his term with a very good speech, actually, emphasizing his commitment and the UN's commitment to gender equality and to multilateralism. This case that we're discussing presents the test for whether Europe, Council of Europe, European Union, the United Nations will stand for women's rights, multilateralism, and human rights. This is the test. So I want to turn to our last speaker, Rose Park, from the Advocates for Human Rights. She directs the Women's Human Rights Program. She has served as an expert for multiple NGOs, the UN, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and the Interparliamentary Union on Women's Human Rights. She has led fact-finding missions in several countries, as well as published reports with recommendations based on international legal standards. She frequently develops and conducts trainings for lawyers, human rights defenders, and systems actors locally and internationally. Currently, Rose is overseeing research on the backlash to the Istanbul Convention, and I am pleased she is able to join to discuss some of their findings from that research. Will you be sharing your own slides, Rose?
I can do that, yes.
Great. The floor is yours.
May I do a time check? What would you like me to aim for time?
I think if it doesn't stress you out too much, 10, 12 minutes.
Okay, let me go for that. All right, well, thank you so much. I am going to share my screen. Let's see here. And I want to thank the organizers, Eşik, for putting together this important panel. And I just want to say the Advocates also stands in solidarity with the women of Turkey. Now, the Advocates for Human Rights is an NGO based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we work to end violence against women through human rights monitoring, training, and advocacy before the UN. And we always work in partnership with other women's organizations. And so based on what we had been hearing from all of our partners, as Özlem had mentioned, we have undertaken research on the backlash to the Istanbul Convention. We've conducted more than 90 interviews now with different human rights defenders across Europe, Central Asia, and the former Soviet Union to learn more. And we've looked most closely at 14 countries. So what I'm going to do here today is I'm going to take a helicopter approach. We've heard some really great details about the situations in specific countries like Poland and Turkey, as well as from our international experts. So I'm going to back up and provide sort of the 1,000-meter view on what's going on with the Istanbul Convention. Now, I want you to keep in mind, we have a number of forces and actors that are opposing the Istanbul Convention. We are talking governments, religious bodies, NGOs and gongos, private actors, and others who oppose the treaty. So when I'm talking about all of these forces, I'm just going to use the term the opposition. So let's talk more about these opposition factors. I'm going to describe 3 overarching factors that have contributed to the general backlash to human rights in the region. So just keep them in mind in the background as we discuss the specifics of the Istanbul Convention. Now, even though you may not always see a direct connection between these factors and the Istanbul Convention backlash, they are still interconnected. Even where these forces are not explicitly attacking the Istanbul Convention, their work is part of an umbrella that ends up attacking the rights found within the Istanbul Convention, as well as spreading harmful messages that are ultimately used against the treaty. Now, the US religious right has played a huge role in fostering the backlash to the rights in the treaty and against the treaty itself. If you think about it, the US religious right has decades of experience doing this work and testing out their tactics in the United States. But as they began to fail in their goals on the United States, like with same-sex marriage, they turned their focus to overseas, where they could export their lessons learned and customize them to local countries. So I'm going to talk more about their strategies, but a few highlights of the lessons learned of the US religious right that they use in other countries is that they work across religious denominations, they use NGOs to do their work, they use the political landscape as their battleground, they focus resources on messaging and social media, and they use lawfare to achieve their goals. I'm highlighting these strategies because these are the same tactics that you see used against the Istanbul Convention. Russian influence should also be addressed because it is in the backdrop. 13 of the 14 countries we looked at were under the control of or had strong ties to the former Soviet Union. Now, Russia and Putin specifically has a geopolitical interest in drawing countries away from the West, away from the EU, away from NATO. If it can keep the continent and the West too divided and too weak to threaten its interests, it can exert greater Russian dominance. So I do want to say that there's a couple ways that Russia does this. First, it uses that pro-traditional family message to reinforce traditional values and stereotypes, which we know is a key reason to oppose the convention. Second, it uses a lot of anti-gay messages to stir up hostilities on so-called gender ideology, which is another reason to oppose the convention. I have to add that Russian influence does not always determine the country's opposition to the convention. For example, Poland has not always welcomed Russian influence historically, but nevertheless, as we've heard from Zuzanna, its right-wing party has been vocal against the Istanbul Convention. I mention this because Russia's very anti-West position is embedded in the attacks against the Istanbul Convention. The convention is seen as a Western import and a foreign intrusion. And finally, we have secularized NGOs. These look to be independent from organized religions, but their missions are very much tied to conservative religious values. They oppose sexual and reproductive rights, LGBTI rights, and rights of women that threaten their idea of the traditional family. The reason why the opposition uses these secular NGOs is because they enable better penetration into the political, the legal, and the international institutions than the church could do on its own. And they're also not as constrained in their messaging or actions like a church would be. So a few of these NGOs will sound very familiar to you that oppose the Istanbul Convention, Agenda Europe, Ordo Iuris, as we heard, Citizen Go, In the Name of the Family in Croatia, ADF International, Bulgarian Association Society and Values, and the World Congress of Families. There's one thing I do need to add here about religions, however, and that is religious bodies are sometimes the opposition in some countries. But in other countries, we found religions, of course, to be actually an ally for us in human rights issues like immigration and the death penalty. So let's move into attacks on the Istanbul Convention. I'm going to move quickly here. I'm keeping an eye on the time. And some of our speakers have already addressed these things. First of all, they're using their traditional family. We heard about this. And what this lets them do is it lets them oppose same-sex marriages, single-parent households, divorcees, and serial marriages. And so when they stick to this narrow definition of a husband, a wife, and their children, it enables them to take an umbrella attack against all other human rights issues. Now, keep in mind, they're very strategic about their messaging on the family. On the positive side, they portray the family as natural, fundamental, and they show pictures of very happy families running through fields. On the other side, they use fear-mongering. Without this natural family, we will face a human extinction. We are not having enough babies. I will say it's white babies they're concerned about. We're not having enough white babies, and therefore the antidote to human extinction is the natural family. So what the opposition, of course, does is they use the traditional family to attack the Istanbul Convention as being anti-family. And we heard from Zuzanna about the opposition's proposal to give out an alternative on the Convention on the Rights of the Traditional Family. We've also talked about gender ideology. I'm going to move a little more quickly through this. I think it's been discussed earlier. It's not something new, but basically it attacks the concept of gender as a choice, as opposed to people being male or female based on their biological sex. Now, gender ideology doesn't have a very concrete definition, so it's very strategic for the opposition because it's elastic. They can use gender ideology to attack all sorts of human rights, LGBTI rights, abortion, contraception, divorce, sex education, and women's empowerment. So how does this fit into the Istanbul Convention? Well, the opposition portrays the Istanbul Convention as the Trojan horse to smuggle in gender ideology. And so what they'll say, you'll hear this about the Istanbul Convention and gender ideology. It's going to cause or increase homosexuality. It's going to legalize gay marriages and adoptions. It's going to create not only a third sex, it's going to create 34 sexes or possibly even 117 different sexes, none of which is true. I urge you guys, when you hear this kind of stuff, call it out. One of our interviewees said that they had asked somebody, where in the convention does it say that? That person couldn't even point to where it was saying that in the convention. Here are some other attacks I'll quickly go through that are used to oppose the Istanbul Convention. Children's education. Article 14 of the convention addresses equality and non-stereotype gender roles in the convention. Well, of course, the opposition twists the meaning of gender to claim that the curriculum is about gender identity. And so that's going to in turn result in girls dressing as little boys. I will say there's a lot of focus on boys turning into little girls. Article 14 is also portrayed as taking away the rights of the parents to be the first educators of their children. And so when you look at the Ordo Iuris' draft convention, they actually restore those rights to the parents to be the first educators of their children in line with their moral and religious values. The state is merely a secondary educator. Nationalism. I mentioned this earlier. The convention is portrayed as a Western, foreign imposition on state sovereignty, and GREVIO is just seen as an overreaching monitoring mechanism. Now, there is something I want to point out that may be useful for you, and that is Article 12 of the Istanbul Convention. It's about measures to end prejudices, customs, and traditions. And they're saying that the convention's going to destroy entire national traditions. I want to point out that the Istanbul Convention's Article 12 is almost the same as CEDAW's Article 5A on modifying social and cultural patterns. So where you can, draw on CEDAW General Recommendation number 19 that explains that the Article's 5A's focus is on ending violence against women rather than violating national identities or cultures. And of course, with anti-immigrant rights, we see the opposition exploiting that existing hostility toward immigrants. Hungary's Viktor Orban has been on record saying that immigrants are violent, they do not respect women, and therefore that's going to make the enforcement of the Istanbul Convention difficult. We also see attacks on the convention's Article 60 on gender-based asylum. We've seen attacks from both Hungary and Poland. For example, Poland's deputy justice minister actually claimed that men trying to get into Europe will claim that they are a woman or they are genderless under the Istanbul Convention so that they can gain entry. So I'm watching the time here and I have about 1 minute left. I am happy to talk about this offline. If people want to email me, they are welcome to do that. But these are some of the key strategies and tools. I know that there was a question and strong interest in the funding, so I'm going to use my last minute or so to talk about that very quickly. The bottom line about funding with the opposition is we don't know a lot about it. It is very opaque and it is non-transparent by design. So I'm going to share the information that we were able to uncover about this. First of all, as we know, the opposition has vast funding, which is completely at a juxtaposition compared to the chronic underfunding that women's groups often face. Now, when you look at the sources of funding behind the opposition, there's many, many different sources. We're talking organized religion in some countries, governments, political parties, the US religious right, wealthy individuals, and possibly indirect Russian sources. Now, here's the difference between the opposition and the women's rights movement. The opposition is in it for the long haul, for the long term, in what they see as a battle, an existential battle that's going to last decades. This sits in contrast to women's groups who are often working to deliver services and specific programs in response to urgent and daily situations of victims and survivors. When you also think about the power structures, you have politicians, political parties, and government officials who are controlling the distribution of funds to NGOs. And if they oppose, if those NGOs oppose if the governments oppose the Istanbul Convention, they can also disadvantage the NGOs that are supporting the convention. Now, the resources, as I mentioned, are very extensive. For example, if you look at Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF, which has issued a legal memorandum opposing EU ratification of the Istanbul Convention, their 2020 annual support was $62 million. And in turn, what the opposition does is they take this money and they reinvest heavily into recruitment, building up their support base even further. So ADF actually operates a legal fellowship where it has trained 2,400 law students from 21 countries. ADF is one of the biggest lawfare organizations, litigation, and it has a huge cadre of almost 4,000 trained lawyers on its roster. The final point I want to end with here on the funding is that the opposition strives for non-transparency. They're able to work within their own country's rules on disclosure of financial information, where in some places this information is not required. The second point I want to make is that the opposition uses its networks to hide and obscure its operations and funding. Let's take Agenda Europe. It is not a legal entity, so there are no legal records on its sources of funding. But when you look deeper, you will see the interconnections. Its trade name, agendaeurope.org, is registered to Sofia Kubi, who is ADF's Director of EU Relations, and Agenda Europe's registration address is actually in Brussels, which is Sofia's European Dignity Watch Group's address. Again, we're talking about huge amounts of undisclosed money. Open Democracy has some good resources on this and has tracked the flow of about $280 million of dark money flowing from the US religious right. And the final point I want to make about funding before I close it out here is that the opposition is really skilled at scattering their costs and their donations. And this way they can actually hide their actual expenses and funding sources. The World Congress of Families is a very good model for this. For each Congress that they hold, none of the contributions are centralized in a single legal entity. The sponsor might pay for one line item. The government might donate the venue. NGOs might pay for other line item costs like printing booklets or interpretation. So as a result, none of the costs and expenses are concentrated in one single entity that has to report it. So when you look at the most recent records of the Howard Center, which is World Congress of Families' parent organization, the funding and the expenses of a World Congress are not found in its financial records. And other times what they will do is they will funnel it through another foundation like they did in Moldova with the First Lady of Moldova's foundation, which enables them to hide their expenses even further. So I want to wrap it up because I know that I went a little over my time, but thank you so much. I am available for questions. There is my contact information if you'd like to reach me for later. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rose, for this wonderful sneak preview of the report that's coming out in 2 months, and it concerns the developments in all of these countries. I think you guys have done an excellent research. Is going to be very useful, but to highlight again the meaning of what Rose ended with here. We're talking about organizations. On the one hand, we have all of these governments that use the demagoguery, the propaganda of having a national, culturally authentic ideas. And on the other, they have very little support from their own populations. At the same time that the groups organizing these attacks are receiving a lot of funding that is unaccounted for, undisclosed in many cases, from other countries. So that's really dangerous, again, for the whole idea of democracy rests on this notion of accountability and non-discrimination and equality. And we see clear violations of all of these. So I want to move to some of the questions that came in the chat. And some of them have already been responded to partly. I see that there was a question about, and a suggestion actually, I think from Esther Sutter, about CSW, NGOs, CSW, or other perhaps UN, more broadly organizing to make a statement, and what women's organizations and those of you who are present here can do. So I think it was sent in the chat that as Women's Platform for Equality, we have drafted an urgent appeal to the Council of Europe that you can, of course, use, put your own organization's names, shorten, and just to emphasize the threat here and how this is a test case for international law. So that's one thing, but there is a question also about what the outcome might be in Turkish courts. I think I'll ask this to Hulya. Actually several of the questions said, if there is no will, even though there is no there is political will to withdraw, what can the opposition do, and what might be the outcome in a court when the decisions the government seems so set on this decision. Could you respond to that, Hulya?
Çok özür dilerim. Ben çeviriden yararlanamıyorum program gereği sanıyorum. Ne yapılabilir Türkiye'de diye mi soruyor?
Hulya şöyle, iç hukukta ne gibi bir, yani iç hukuka da anayasaya da aykırı olduğu çok net olarak anlaşıldı. Fakat bu durumda mahkemeye gittiğinizde ne bekliyor sizi gibi bir soru var. Buradan ne çıkmasını bekliyorsunuz? Ve bunun sonuçları ne olacak diye ayrı bir soru var. Yani kadınlar için sonuçları, sözleşmeden çekilmenin ne olacak diye ayrı bir soru var. Bu ikisini sana sunayım.
Maalesef Türkiye'de bağımsız bir yargıdan söz edemeyeceğimiz için şu anda açtığımız davaların nasıl sonuçlanacağı hakkında bir fikrimiz yok. Yani normal bir hukuk sisteminde kesinlikle bu davaların kabul edilmesi lazımdı. Çünkü uluslararası sözleşmelerden böyle çıkılamayacağı açık, kanunu çıkartmak gerekiyor. Fakat temel haklarla ilgili olduğu için kanunun çıkması da yetersiz. Onun için hukuken her zaman tartışılacak bir karar olacak bu. Şimdi Türkiye açısından baktığımızda hani sonucunda ne olacak? Biz sonuna kadar Avrupa Konseyi de dahil olmak üzere bu karardan dönülmesi için uğraşacağız. Ama sonuç olarak İstanbul Sözleşmesi aslında bir ilkeler bütünü. Ve şu anda bu sözleşmeye karşı çıkanlar sadece İstanbul Sözleşmesi'ne karşı çıkmış olmuyorlar. Bir toplum modeline karşı başka bir toplum modeli öneriyorlar. Onun için aşırı milliyetçiler, onun için radikal dindarlar bu sözleşmeye karşı çıkıyor. Türkiye açısından biraz farklı bir durum söz konusu. Daha sözleşmeden çıktık biz duyurusu yapıldığı anda 15 dakikada şeriat da, hilafeti de getiririz. Medeni kanundan çıkalım sohbetleri başladı Türkiye'de. Aynı kesim şimdi bütün laik hukuk düzeni ve kadın erkek eşitliğini getiren bütün kanunlardan vazgeçilmesini savunuyor. Dolayısıyla toplum projesi, hani Türkiye'nin siyasi iktidarının farklı bir toplum projesi bu. Birincisi kadın erkek eşitliğine karşılar. Aileyi ve topluma zarar verme meselesi değil burada tartışma. O kadınlarla erkeklerin eşit olduğuna inanmadıkları için o eşitliği getiren bütün sözleşmelere karşılar. Şu anda Türkiye'de Lanzarote Sözleşmesi'ne karşı da bir kampanya yürüyor. Çocukların cinsel istismar ve sömürüden korunması kampanyası bu. Buna karşı da bir kampanya var. CSW'ye karşı kampanya var. Bütün uluslararası sözleşmelere karşı kampanya var. Şimdi ikinci nokta, bu toplum projesinin ve İstanbul Sözleşmesi'ne karşıtlığın ikinci ayağı LGBT karşıtlığı, cinsel yönelim ve cinsiyet kimliği konusunda net ayrımcı bir yaklaşım burada. Bu yaklaşımın içerisinde aslında simgesi LGBT artılar olduğu bu ayrımcı bakış açısının eşit yurttaşlık kavramına da karşılar. Yani sadece kadın erkek eşitliğine değil, herhangi bir kesimden yurttaşın diğer kesimle eşit olduğu fikrine de karşılar. Dolayısıyla hiyerarşik bir toplum modelini ailede reis, toplumda reis, devlette reis üzerine kurulu bir toplum modelini kabul ettirmeye çalışıyorlar bize. İstanbul Sözleşmesi'nden çıkma girişimi bunun büyük bir adım oldu. Artı bir başka noktaya da karşılar. Bu da hem hak kavramıyla hem laik hukuk düzeniyle çok ilgili, hak kavramının kendisine karşılar. İşçi hakkı, tüketici hakkı, çocuk hakkı, kadın hakkı, bu haklar batılı seküler toplumların bizim toplumumuzu bozmak için dışarıdan ithal edilmiş haklardır. Biz bir tek kul hakkı denen din temelli hakka inanırız diyorlar. İstanbul Sözleşmesi kadını şiddetten korur, yaşatır dediğimizde bir üst düzey yetkili İstanbul Sözleşmesi değil, benim inancım korur, şiddetten korursa kadınları diyerek şiddet uygulama ölçüsünü dini inancına bağlamıştı. Dolayısıyla biz şu anda Türkiye'de sadece bir sözleşmeyi değil, bir toplum modelini, yurttaşlarının birbiriyle eşit olduğu, özgür olduğu, birbirine bağımlı yaşamadığı bir toplum modelinin kavgasını görüyoruz Türkiye'de. Onun için bu kadın kadın cinayetleri meselesine döndüğümüz zaman gerçekten Türkiye'de kadın cinayetlerinin nedenleri arasında, yani kadın cinayetlerinin %80'i yaklaşık olması lazım. Çünkü çalışmalar %60'ın üstünde olduğunu gösteriyor. Boşanmak ya da partnerinden ayrılmak için öldürülüyor kadınlar. Yani bu doğrudan doğruya kadınların özgürlük için, eşitlik için canlarını kaybettikleri bir mücadeleye dönüştü Türkiye'de. Yani boşanmak isteyen kadınlar şu anda Türkiye'de bunu biliyor. Ayşe Hatun Eskişehir'de 23 kere şikayette bulunduğu halde korunmadığı için baltayla öldürüldü. Ayrılmak istediği kocası tarafından. Sevtap Şahin 60 başvuruya rağmen öldürüldü boğularak kocası tarafından. Yani bunu bilen kadınlar, bugün boşanmak isteyen kadınlar bunu biliyorlar. Ama özgürlük için ölümü göze alıyorlar Türkiye'de. Türkiye Kadın Hareketi'ni çok zor günler bekliyor. Bu projenin bundan sonraki adımları çocuk istismarcılarına af getirilmesi, çocuklarla cinsel ilişki yaşının indirilmesi, evlilik yaşının 12'ye kadar indirilmesi gibi projeler var. Aynı şekilde bakın, kadınlar boşanmak için hayatlarını ortaya koyarken boşanan kadına ödenecek yoksulluk nafakasının sınırlanması ve kadının kendi isteğiyle boşanmasının devlet eliyle açlığa mahkum edilerek engellenmesi girişimi var. Yani uzatmayayım, bu İstanbul Sözleşmesi'den çıkış gerçekleşirse bunun arkası domino taşı gibi gelecek. Mesela biz de büyük bir kürtaj mücadelesi verdik Türkiye Kadın Hareketi olarak. Yani yasal hak olarak kürtajı korumayı başardık. Ama fiilen kürtaj yapacak hastane neredeyse kalmadığı için hak kullanılamaz hale getirildi. Kadınların kağıt üzerinde boşanma hakkı var ama cinayetlere karşı can güvenliği sağlanmadığı için, şimdi de ekonomik olarak yoksulluğa terk edileceği için boşanan kadın hiçbir şekilde boşanma hakkı olmayacak. Onun için bir toplum projeksiyonu bu. Sadece Türkiye için değil, bütün dünya için bir toplum projeksiyonu. Yani kadın hareketine saldıran bütün bu güçler farklı bir toplum modelini hayata geçirmek istiyorlar. Başta kadın erkek eşitliği olmak üzere aslında kimsenin eşit olmasını istemedikleri bir toplum yaratıyorlar. Türkiye'de kadınlar mücadele etmeye devam edecek. Bu mücadelenin ortak noktalarını bulup birlikte yapılacak birçok şeyi var. Yani hep birlikte bunların diğer otoriter liderlere emsal olmaması için her zamankinden daha geniş ittifaklar kurmak zorundayız. Çünkü erkekler arası ittifaklar son derece kuvvetli, son derece örgütlü. Yani Vatikan'a ayrı, Müslüman Ülkeler Birliği ayrı. Bunların arasında aslında son tarihte hiçbir fark yok ataerkillik açısından. Her biri kendi bulunduğu yerde patriarkayı tekrar ve tekrar daha güçlü bir şekilde inşa etmek için çalışıyor. Çünkü onun için bu buluşmaların daha sık olmasını temenni edeyim ben de.
Çok teşekkürler Hulya. Thank you very much to Hulya. There was another question about what people can do on the Council of Europe front. And I want to respond to that. It came through either the chat or the Q&A, and I'll look at the Q&A in a minute. But as Women's Platform for Equality, we have actually worked over the weekend to draft a letter explaining the legal status or exposing the illegality of the presidential decision. So we urge everyone to write to the Council of Europe and to send them messages through social media, to contact the people in their own countries that serve in the PACE committee or in the Council of Europe, and send these letters raising their awareness and increasing their commitment to highlighting how important this case is and what its implications are, not just for women's rights in Turkey, but in the region, but also for human rights and for democracy. So please take that from the chat, or you can also follow this statement and our upcoming statement, which will be briefer on the Women's Platform for Equality or Eşik website. Fatma, did you want to say something? Genoveva, there is a request for you to share also your contact. At this moment, I'd like to ask all the panelists if they want to share their contact. And also to, there were some questions, Rose, and I don't know if Rose wants to share her presentation at this time since their report is coming out, but there was a question about that. So I will leave that to the panelists. I just received actually a message from our social media team. They want everyone to join us in social media to say Turkey is not safe for women. And I believe it's been put in the chat. Are there any questions from panelists or from others? Currently, we have almost 250 people still watching our webinar. Thank you all so much for this show of solidarity. I think it's been very informative and it's also done us good because we have been living through some really hard few days. Hulya, would you like to make the closing remarks? Son sözleri söylemek ister misin? Veya Fatma geldi şu anda. Önce Fatma'ya sözü vereyim. Çünkü Fatma bu organizasyonda, bu organizasyonun fikir anası. She's the mother behind the organization. And I'd like Fatma to say a few more words now that she is vaccinated. And then I will ask, please, Hulya, to lead all of our attendees to action. What can we do? What can they do leaving this meeting? We want them to feel empowered that they can do at least a few things. So birkaç öneriyle bitirebilirsen Hulya, herkes buradan daha güçlenmiş ayrılacaktır ne yapmaları gerektiğine dair. Ama önce Fatma'ya vereyim, en son sana vereyim.
Yes, thank you very much, Özlem. I tried to listen all the speakers, and I have to tell that you shared really very valuable things. I want to thank all of you, each one of you. I want to thank Hulya, a big thank to Hulya. And I think that with this panel, we also show to the world that the Turkish women's movement is very powerful. We are really, and we are in connected with all the abroad, women's movement, and we are behaving in solidarity together with the sisters. This is very valuable, and women's movement of Turkey and of the world, I think will overcome all these burdens, all these struggles. We will win because we are so right. we are right. We are on the right side. So we will win together, I believe. I am so happy to host this panel as the Kırmızı Biber Derneği Red Pepper Association. This is one of the best panel we have done in CSW, I have to tell. We will continue to do this. Kırmızı Biber Derneği is also a part of the Eşik platform, Women's Platform for Equality, and many other platforms. I mean, in Turkish movement, we are behaving all together. We are fighting this struggle all together. We know that we are fighting with very big, very powerful organizations, very powerful, you know, and so that's why we have to be in solidarity. We have to keep it together. We have to fight together, and we are really together. We are united. I want to pass the floor to Hulya, and I want to tell everyone who attended to this meeting, thank you. Please leave your email address or any communication thing in the chat so we can communicate with you further for the further meetings, for the further notices. You can give your communications to the chat, and you can also write to the panel. There is a panel page in the NGO CSW, so you can give to that. You can also write in the chat in those pages. Thank you, Özlem, for your help. You were great, to tell the truth. Thank you, everyone, and Hulya, the floor is yours. I love you all.
Çok teşekkürler bu gerçekten duygusal konuşma için. Biz hem Türkiye'de İstanbul Sözleşmesi'nden çıkışın hukuk dışı sürecini durdurabilmek için hem Avrupa Konseyi'nin bu hukuk dışı işlemi yürürlüğe sokmasına karşı Avrupa Konseyi'ne tekrar yapılanın hatalı olduğunu anlatmak için mücadele etmeye devam edeceğiz. Bütün dünyada küresel bir saldırıyla karşı karşıya kadın hareketi. Çünkü küresel olarak çok güçlendik. Çünkü elde ettiğimiz eşitlik yolunda elde ettiğimiz kazanımlar çok güçlü ve çok korkutuyor. Yani sadece patriarkayı değil, o patriarkanın tek tek ondan yararlanan her bir erkek bireyini tehdit altında hissettiren bir kazanımlarımız var. Saldırı küresel olduğu sürece mücadelenin ve direnişin de küresel olmasından başka çaremiz yok. O yüzden Polonya'da bir eylem olduğunda biz burada havalara uçuyoruz. Ya da herhangi bir ülkede herhangi bir kadın boşanmak istediği için, eğitim hakkı için, çalışma hakkı için öldürüldüğünde biz burada herkesle beraber gözyaşı döküyoruz. O yüzden küresel saldırıya karşı küresel mücadele, yani eski siyaset yapma tarzlarını, eski siyasetçileri, eskimiş, içi boşalmış kurumları silkeleyen bir hareket yaratmamız lazım. Türkiye'de bu anlamda çok önemli işler yapmaya çalışıyoruz kadınlar olarak. Bu kadar muhafazakar bir iktidara rağmen toplumun %86'sı, bakın muhafazakar kadınlar da bunun içinde, Türkiye Kadın Hareketi'ne güveniyor. %86. Hiçbir şeyimiz yok, medyamız yok, hiçbir ana akım medyaya çıkamıyoruz. Toplumun %85'i devletin kadın erkek eşitliğini sağlaması gerektiğini düşünüyor. %5'i sadece şiddetten yana görüşler veriyor toplumun. Dönüştürebiliyoruz biz toplumu. İstanbul Sözleşmesi'nde bir ayda 7 puan dönüştürdük. Hiçbir aracımız yok. Yani Türkiye'deki siyasi partilerin de yalnız bıraktığı bir hareketiz aslında biz genel anlamda. Buna rağmen yapabileceğimizi görüyoruz. Türkiye'de her türlü görüş ayrılığını bir yana bırakarak bir araya gelen birlikler, platformlar oluşturmayı başardık. %99 için feminizm diyoruz. %1 kalsın orada. Onların bütün toplumların demokrasisi için en uç görüşlere de ihtiyacımız var. Ama biz stratejimizi %99 üzerine kurarsak, aynen Türkiye'de olduğu gibi %85'i aştı kadın hareketine güven. Biz bunu 3-5 puan daha bu İstanbul Sözleşmesi mücadelesinde arttırırız diye düşünüyoruz. Türkiye'de çok kullandığımız bir slogan var kadın dayanışması açısından. Yaşasın kadın dayanışması diyoruz ama hemen ekliyoruz. Kadın kadının kurdu değil, kadın kadının yurdudur. birbirimize yurt olmaya devam edelim. Çok teşekkürler emeği geçen herkese.
Çok teşekkürler Hülya. Hepinize çok teşekkürler. Thank you all for your solidarity. We will prevail.
Take a picture. Who's...
I actually wanted to add something to that, if I can, just a word.
Sure.
Because someone had written in the chat, "We will never walk alone." And as Hulya was so beautifully speaking about the Turkish slogan, you know, one of the rallying cries that has mobilized women and kept them together in Poland is this slogan, "You will never walk alone." And, you know, and it really extends to all of us here and all of us out there. And it is a true show of, you know, transnational solidarity beyond borders. So, you know, it's not just laws and conventions, but it's also gestures, words, and, you know, the symbolism. So let's create such spaces. Let's have more conversations like that in the open. I think this is really bonding and beautiful. So thank you so much for allowing me to be here with you and share my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Zuzanna. Together we will create a new and better world.
Word. Yes.
Goodbye all. Good night. Good afternoon, wherever you are.
Herkese